It's really interesting. My wife can kind of tell you sometimes I get a little historical when I go around Independence or different places like that. I probably drive them all nuts, but it's really interesting because you just can't look at the landscape around Independence and not see the what was there before. Just like I had talked about earlier, about Brother Edward Partridge, about we were standing in line to vote. We voted early, so we were voting there right next to Verona's Cafe and all that little building area there. And right across there is that bank building, which is, I don't think it's occupied right at the moment, but it was a bank building. And of course, none of that was there, but that's just right behind that was where their homestead was actually at. So you can imagine all those things. And so to me, occasionally I sit and I look and see the landscape very differently than sometimes other people do. But it is interesting to know those things. Okay, sorry for that. Any other thoughts on this before yes, Sister Ray.
Well, I just have a question about 13a. He said they dedicated the land and the spot for the temple. What spot are they talking about?
Well, I believe they're talking about, the temple lot that, we all look up there somewhere around that area. The issue that we have, and this is, I don't know if I've shared this historical point with you or not, but Brother Fred M. Smith, when they were looking after his father passed away, not too long after his father passed away, they were looking at what they were going to do. They wanted to build a temple. He was looking to do that because you remember I've always kind of said that Fred M. scared the saints to death because he was like, well, let's go build a kingdom. Let's go build Zion. And they're like, whoa, wait a minute. We don't mind singing about it. We don't mind praying about it, but we were not interested in actually doing it. I mean, let's slow down a little bit here. That's crazy talk. It upset a lot of people, him going down to that idea. And one of the things he did was he had a committee, where he was the head of that committee. And he had a lot of guys that knew history very, very well and had looked through this as best they could. And they basically come back with the understanding that they didn't know exactly where the temple lot truly was. They know about the region, about the area, but they don't know the specific, absolute 100% area. The marker stones that the Hedrikites, or I should say temple lot folks, I'm sure they don't appreciate that, said that they found those in, we don't know if that's really what it was or not. Because if you actually read further in how they actually excavated and found those stones, it could have been whatever. You really isn't a way to know. I'm not trying to say that he didn't mark it. I'm not trying to say whatever, but when you really start getting into it, you really start to understand that over the years, there's a lot of hearsay, and whether we like it or not, and sometimes things in an oral tradition are said very accurately, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's the big game of telephone. Well, I heard it was this way, and I heard it was that way. So there's some challenges along that line. Anyway, yes. What? Yeah, Shaw?
Didn't he also draw up plans for a temple that looks very much like the auditorium?
Yeah, so if you if you look at, maybe sometime I can put together a complete presentation if you'd like to see that. One of the things that might shock you a little bit is that the temple that Joseph Smith III had his vision of looks strikingly like the auditorium. I don't know if you know that or not. There's actually a sketch of what he had seen in this vision that was there. Also, one of the things is that, I don't know if, so I'm kind of one of these guys that have laid things out over the years and looked at everything. It's actually, if you argue where the Temple Lot Church says the Temple Lot is at, then that actually puts the auditorium on the Temple Lot, because there were multiple lots. There were two big temple lots, if you remember right, with the 24 temples. So, but it is interesting, though, that it was there. Now, I've never seen anywhere where anyone's called it a temple, but it is interesting that it was designed specifically in that manner, and it looks just like that. I don't know if that was by design or by accident or what.
You said they went 12 miles and built a house and dedicated it to the 12 tribes. Where? I mean, east, west, south, north?
West.
West?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
12 miles.
Yeah, 12 miles. So yeah, it's just kind of like the saints in Westport. You know, there were a lot of saints in Westport, in that Westport area. We think of things in a lot closer proximity, but I think the saints then didn't, because when you look at farms, they may have had a 100-acre farm, and another 100-acre farm, and another 500-acre farm, something of that nature. So they weren't as compact as we are here. We just have different understandings of scales. It's just like one of the things I thought was really interesting when I did some research is that, when it was given about churches with large congregations, it talks about, I'm trying to remember the section, talks about basically they should be, if a high priest is available, should be presided over by a high priest. Do you know what size they were talking about? Roughly 50 people. Yeah, we would think 300, we would think 500, we would think much larger, right? That's not the scale that they were working with at that time. So, kind of interesting just to look at things. We have our understanding of if you will, weights and measures of our day, but then when you go to theirs, it's very different. So, okay. I'm sorry, I kind of got off track here. Any other thoughts here on 13A and B? Oh, yes, Brother Jared.
I just want to make a comment to clarify a few things. To accomplish the residue of the work which I have appointed unto them in their own land. I've gone about in researching the word residue in different contexts, and I found the 1828 Webster Dictionary.
Sure.
It is very similar to a remnant. So a remnant of the work. But then it says later on, and the residue shall be ruled by the conferences. Now, is that referring to a different form of residue or same remnant?
Okay, yeah, say that one more time for me, because
Okay.
you're being very precise, and I want to make sure I'm the same way. So.
Yes. So the first time it says residue of the work, it's talking about the remnant of the work. The second time it's used, and the residue shall be ruled by the conferences. Is that referring to the same remnant, like use of the word as in remnant, or is it in a different form of like residue, this residue of the land?
Well, I think that he's referring to the church, regardless. So I don't think he's referring to just the land or the people in that land, but the people who represent the church, who are baptized members of the church. So that's how I would answer that. Yes, Brother Rick.
I may be correct or incorrect on this, everybody can decide. I think in the first use of the word residue, he's talking about the overall work of the church, and then he talks about in their own land, in the whatever specific area he's talking about, but then the residue of the lands by the conference. I think the word's being used in two different contexts here. One for the, quote, work of the church, let's say building of Zion, and the other one is a more temporal, the lands that you're occupying. Feel free to disagree with me, folks.
No, I think that makes sense. Yeah. Brother Carl?
Sidney and Joseph and Oliver were going back to Kirtland. That's where their land was. They
Mhm.
were in Independence that particular time,
Right?
but their established residence was in Kirtland.
That's right.
That's where they're going back to do the work back in Kirtland. And the rest of it would be the work the conference decided that the brethren needed to do. That's the residue. They had to go back and finish the work in Kirtland that they may have left and whatever had to happen there. And then as conferences go, men were given certain assignments.
Yeah.
And so then they were to take that and go and do the residue of whatever it was the conference asked them to do.
Yeah, I think that's true because they, the whole thing is that at this time you've got two portions of the church, kind of two areas of the church running at the same time, and they're trying to build up Independence while they've got Kirtland where it's at, and then Kirtland unfortunately is having problems, that are not too good, which is stay out of money investing and printing money, but you've got all kinds of issues going on there, and while they're here again trying to do this, and of course I really do believe that all of these issues popped up simply because they were moving forward, they were moving towards the kingdom, and because they were moving towards the kingdom, these things flared up like they did. Yes, Sister
I'm just oversimplifying the thing. I just substituted the word rest for residue. The rest of the work, which I've appointed unto them in their own land, and the rest shall be ruled by the conferences.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, sometimes we have this danger of overanalyzing, so we have to be careful. You know what I mean? It's because I wish our language was more precise. I wish our language was more in depth. But then if it was, then we'd kind of end up like with Mandarin or Cantonese, where you've got 500, is it 500 characters, something like that you have, and you have a lot more words that you need. In the English language, you can get away with somewhere around 10,000 words in your vocabulary, and you can converse fairly well. But in some languages, that won't get you very far. All right, very good. Let's see here. Okay, 14A and 14B. Would someone like to read those two? Yeah, Sister Carol.
And let no man return from this land except he bear record by the way of that which he knows and most assuredly believes. Let that which has been bestowed upon Ziba Peterson be taken from him, and let him stand as a member of the church and labor with his own hands with the brethren until he is sufficiently chastened for all his sins, for he confesseth them not, and he thinketh to hide them.
Okay, so I finally figured out what Ziba Peterson did, okay, if you're interested. So my understanding is that what he did was that he told a young lady that he was betrothed to a young lady, okay? And, I'm going to marry you, you're my fiance. And he found, I'm guessing, here again, I don't know where he was, he found a prettier girl. And so he broke his engagement with this other girl, and I don't even think he bothered to tell her, and went and married the other one. And in this time period, when you said something, you gave your word, your bond, that meant something. That was like a contract. You didn't just lightly say you were going to marry somebody and then just don't do it. That was really wrong. Still should be really wrong. But point is that that's what Ziba Peterson's in trouble for. Yeah.
How did he think he could hide that?
Well, I would start with men are stupid at times when it comes to things like that. Men just don't always get relationships. We we struggle at that at times. I think also the other side of that is that communication wasn't as fast as it was, in our day and age. Heavens, in our day and age, we got cell phones, we got all kinds of things and there's distance and space between people, so that, somebody wouldn't know that. But yeah, it was very foolish for him to think that, nobody was not going to tattle on him. I don't know what he was thinking.
Yes, we men many times don't use great wisdom. As an aside, somewhat humorous but sad on that, a number of years ago, there was an incident in the Remnant Church where a young man and woman were, in a sense, engaged. And the young man decided that he no longer wanted to be engaged, so he faxed the woman at work. Anyway, there's some humor in it, but it's pretty dark. So yeah, it wasn't very wise.
Yeah. I've always felt like if you were asking a man to build a brick wall or to design something or to do work on something, they can take great thought and great care in it. But when it comes to relationships, and especially in understanding things, I remember counseling my daughter, and saying that men aren't the smartest, folks on the thing here. It's not that they just don't think things through. So just understand that when it comes to women, they're kind of stupid. So just understand that. Well, anyway, I thought that was an interesting little tidbit. So if you were wondering what it was the Lord was upset with him about, that's what it was.
I do find it interesting in 14a where it is expected. You are told by the Lord, when you are traveling, witness, testify, tell the things you know and believe. You don't just go from here to St. Louis without saying something to somebody, wherever. And that's interesting that the Lord looks at it as you are expected to witness wherever you go.
Yeah. And, here's the thing that's also interesting about this. When this was given and when this was set up, in that expectation, the Lord knew the hearts of those who received this revelation at that time. So he knew that they knew they had witness. And so he was telling them, you're going to need to do that. So Shell and then Ray, Sister Ray.
I still find it just interesting that, people think they can hide their sins and their bad behaviors from other church people and from God, but then, and they still in this time period, they're laying their sins out before the people. I mean, this is going in the scripture, and here we are a couple hundred years later reading about someone else's sin. It's like, I wonder how we would behave today if we knew that anything and everything we did sinful could actually be put in print before the people.
Yeah. Well, I want you to think about something. Think about the conferences we've had of the church, okay? And think about how folks have been really ornery, fibbed, lied in front of people, said hurtful things, done things in the conferences, right? The rules of order that Joseph Smith III wrote for the church demands that immediately judgment take place, that those people are called out, they are called to repent. If there's an argument between two people, they must resolve it, and they did it in public, so therefore they're going to resolve it in public, in front of everyone. Kind of makes you wonder how everyone would act in a conference if you knew you were going to be held accountable for what you said. And if you were found lying, they were confronted with it. So it's a very different world. Yes, Sister Ray.
Oh, I was just going to go back and comment on what Don said about we're expected to bear record of what we know. It reminded me of the scripture in Psalm that says, "Let the redeemed of the Lord say so."
Ah, yeah.
I've always been impressed with that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good reference. Yes. Brother Bob.
Well, also in 14a, that last phrase, and most assuredly believes, you can't just be telling people what you think they want to hear. You've got to believe this yourself. And that's vastly different than where we are today. You got people that will do all kinds of things telling people what they think they want to hear. In fact, most of them are encouraged to do that, and especially in the ministry. And as a result, they've gone off on who knows whatever tangent, and they don't have the following that they should have. But when they believe what they're saying, and when they actually do what they're saying, then they can talk to people and explain to them what's going on, the gospel of Jesus Christ, because they believe in that gospel. It was kind of like Peter on the day of Pentecost. He didn't proclaim to people what was going on and all of that good sort of stuff. He believed what he was saying. And because he believed what he was saying, the Holy Spirit could work with people and they could ask them then what needed to be done and those kinds of things.
You know, it's interesting you said that, because when you were talking about that, that reminded me of all the Christian ministers who don't believe in the virgin birth. How can you stand at the pulpit and talk about the divinity of Christ and not believe that it was a virgin birth and that he is truly the Son of God? No wonder they're not convincing anybody, because they're not convinced themselves. Good point. Yeah. Sister Ray.
I was talking about that when I worked at the auditorium with one of the, I guess you'd say, hierarchy. And he said he didn't necessarily believe he was a virgin birth, but he didn't have to be. I'm sorry, my throat's not working. He didn't have to be, because God could make him his son and make him divine. And that is so ridiculous, because if he was born of man with a sin nature, God couldn't make him not. I don't understand that kind of reasoning, but that was his reasoning.
Yeah, to me, I see a lot of logical fallacies in that, because first of all, if he could take someone that was corrupt like that and make him the Son of God, then why couldn't he do a virgin birth? What's the difference? Okay, why is one any more powerful than the other? How about it's what he said it was? Because, it's kind of funny. I don't know about you all, but when I start to research and start, testing the Lord on the things that he says, it ends up being just what he says. Just what he meant, just what he said. Yes, Brother Bob.
Well, Arthur Oakman in his endowment series made that very clear. I was just listening to it last night, that God cannot and will not, under any circumstances, override our agency. Mm-hmm. And because if whatever this individual was saying was true, he would have to override Jesus' agency in order to make him a son of God. Mm-hmm. And he cannot and will not do that.
Yeah, which runs into that whole restoration gospel logic I talk about, which is if we do math on that, what have we done? We just changed the attributes of God. And if we change the attributes of God that we absolutely know to be true, it's no longer God. There is no God. But we know there is a God, therefore, that's foolishness, what they're talking about. All right. Excellent conversation. Yes, Brother Jared.
I've got two comments. One of them is an interesting little note of the three words, by the way. And it's interesting to me because I was reading through it before, and I found that's not the first time it's happened in this section alone. But also I wonder if it's connected to what Lord Jesus Christ of Nazareth said once. No one comes unto the Father but by me. I am the way, the truth, and the life.
Mm-hmm.
by the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The second thing is something that is connected to what we've just been talking about.
Mhm.
I've learned this recently. Anyone who calls on the Lord's name gives him title to be the Lord. But anyone who makes him Lord promotes him to the ruler of his life.
Mhm.
And that is a clear distinction between someone who's calling Jesus Christ Lord versus following him.
Yeah. Yeah. Woe unto them that cry, Lord, Lord. Yeah. Absolutely. Very good point. And you know, and the other one is followers of the way, because they were known as followers of the way. And who was that way? Jesus Christ. All right. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes.
There's one other thing we have to remember here is that we are, what I want to say, in bondage to time. And that day that was written, you had all kinds of time to travel.
Mm-hmm.
Now anytime we travel, we're to be here and there and there and there. We don't have that kind of time. They were walking, or they were riding in a wagon, and they've had to find a haymow to put their head down in, or to even find food. And so, there's a whole different thing there, because we're bound by this whole time thing. You know, we take a trip to St. Louis, we think, okay, 3 hours, okay?
Yep.
And then 3 hours back, that's 6, and we got 2 hours to be there to do whatever we're going to do. And that's our way of thinking. We don't ever think about sitting down someplace and talking to somebody about the gospel, or even having the opportunity most of the time, if you think about that.
No, you know, it's, you brought up a very good point in our society. And so you guys know that I'm a technology guy, okay? But I have thought long and hard about technology for many reasons. And I'll remember the first time I got my first awakening to the evils of technology, not the obvious ones, but the ones that were more subtle, was pay at the pump. And I'll tell you why. Because while we were transitioning to pay at the pump, you know, here in Independence, we had all pay at the pump, and in all the big cities I had pay at the pump. But when I'd go out to these little small towns out in the middle of Nebraska or Kansas, or I might be in Idaho, somewhere like that, you have to stand in line and hand cash to somebody, right? And while you're standing in line, sometimes you're standing in a fairly long line. And the most amazing phenomena occurs when you're doing that. People start talking to you like you're a long-lost cousin. And they're just being friendly. It's not like being in Chicago where you're thinking, where's my wallet? What do you want? They're being nice. And I could see in this time period, for what you're saying, they would be going to find the next nearest farmhouse that they might be able to find water, maybe a little bit of oats for the horses, whatever it might be, and some relief, some food. And they would have to rely on the goodness of strangers as they went along that trail. And so they had many opportunities. The other part that I like about how can I say, I never thought about it this way, but it was when here again, I was thinking about the technology side of things. It's like, can you imagine spending all day walking to someplace? You have plenty of time to think. You really do. You really have a whole lot of time to think. And in fact, can you imagine just coming back from church and you had to walk 6-8 hours to get to church? Boy, that sermon would stick with you, wouldn't it? Because there's nothing else to dissuade you, really. I mean, you don't look at so many trees and squirrels and whatever, but you're thinking. I mean, at least I know that's what would be going through my mind. I'd be running all that through my mind. Where am I at? Contemplating and so forth. And I think that's important. And I know there's people that have professions where they can have a little bit of, say, windshield time, for instance, and they can think. But these people really had windshield time. They really did. And it probably was a great ministry to them. And to your point, we don't have that. In fact, technology has removed almost all of our, what I would call free time or time alone that we could spend with the Lord, because if you let it, because it certainly can do it. And I know when I travel, it's a struggle because most people plug in and tune out when they get on a plane. And when I sit with people, but occasionally I'll find people that want to talk and so forth. But it's more of a rare situation than it is a common like it used to be. Yes.
Well, I was thinking about having time to think. I've read a lot of autobiographies about the early missionaries who walked those long distances carrying heavy satchels, and nobody invited them in for dinner, and they had to walk all day the next day with no food. They had a lot of time to get depressed too, and they really had to call on the Lord and have Him lift them up, because they did get depressed. I don't know how other way to put it. And I guess I'll just leave it at that, because I don't want to enlarge on their thoughts, because I can't remember them all. But I know that they did get very lonely.
Sure, absolutely. I'm sure that you became to appreciate very greatly the things given. Yeah. Oh, no, you're all right. All right. Okay. I think that, I can see, we only have this one last one, but I'm going to stop here. We'll pick up. I was hoping we'd get through this section, but we had really great conversations. Thank you all for participating, and let's make a preparation for the service to come.